Yeah, so just to be clear, I was the director for interagency relations and killed 7 astronauts. So yeah, I absolutely fell in love with Poland. We might be able to save our species. Lowest temperature on Mars is minus 150 degrees centigrade, okay?
Witam wszystkich bardzo serdecznie w następnym odcinku, a dzisiejszym gościem jest John Hall, który przez 25 lat pracował w NASA jako dyrektor do spraw eksportu i współpracy międzynarodowej. Porozmawiamy nie tylko o misjach na Księżyc i Marsa, ale też o tym, jak wyglądała jego droga na szczyt i o wyzwaniach, z którymi musiał się mierzyć. To historia sukcesu, ale i cena, którą trzeba było za niego zapłacić. Serdecznie zapraszam. Partnerem dzisiejszego odcinka jest studio filmowe Hajki. Tutaj zrealizujesz swoje wideo marzeń.
3 Lwy to nowoczesna szkoła języka angielskiego, oferująca kursy indywidualne, grupowe oraz zajęcia online. Dzięki elastycznemu podejściu i wykwalifikowanym native speakerom, nauka dopasowana jest do potrzeb każdego kursanta. Szkoła prowadzi zajęcia na różnych poziomach zaawansowania, stawiając na praktyczne użycie języka i przyjazną atmosferę.
To John, witam cię serdecznie. Bardzo się cieszę, że znalazłeś czas i się udało tutaj nam dzisiaj spotkać.
Ja dziękuję.
Słuchaj, zanim zaczniemy i porozmawiamy tutaj naszym o celu rozmowy, po tym, co się dzisiaj spotkamy i na co myślę, że wszyscy czekają, chciałbym, żebyśmy mogli się cofnąć trochę do lat dzieciństwa, trochę do lat studiów i tego, jak to się wszystko stało, że znalazłeś się w największej organizacji kosmicznej w Stanach Zjednoczonych. Także myślę, że mało osób ma świadomość tego, że można znaleźć się w NASA poprzez pracę w Senacie. Chciałbym, żebyś opowiedział trochę właśnie, jak to w ogóle, czemu znalazłeś się w Senacie i jak doszło do tego, że później znalazłeś się w NASA.
Okay, I'll be glad to do that. So, I started my work in the United States Senate, working for a senator from New Mexico. His name was Pete Domenici. He was the chairman of the Senate Budget Committee and a personal friend. And his son and I continue to be best friends today. He offered me a volunteer job, unpaid, starting out. As an intern when I was just 17 years old. And then he hired me to be on his staff. And so all the while that I was in college at Georgetown University in Washington, I was also working basically full-time in the Senate as a legislative specialist. And I did that for 4 years while basically not going to school.
To było akurat, to się stało po studiach, tak?
During studies, or
right.
almost instead of studies. I spent much more time working in the Senate than I did going to class. But that was how it was. So that was how I started out. Then I went to law school, and after law school, I came back to the Washington area. Into private practice with a law firm there. I did that for a few years. And I was invited to come to the government and work for the government for another agency. After a few years there, NASA was asking me to come join them. And at first I wasn't all that interested. But after a couple of requests and invitations to join them, I did, and it was the best decision I ever made.
Powiedz mi proszę, co się dzieje w momencie, kiedy NASA składa ci propozycję pracy, a ty mówisz, zastanowię się.
At the time, I was happy, what I was doing.
Right.
And I thought NASA, was a fine place. I thought the people were, lovely, but it wasn't exactly the kind of legal work that I was necessarily thinking would be my future. But once I got to NASA and started working with them in the Office of the General Counsel as a senior counsel for international law, I loved it. And like I said, it was the most fortunate accident that ever happened in my career. The best decision that I made was to go join NASA.
Powiedz mi proszę, czy był moment wcześniej, zanim dołączyłeś do NASA, czy był taki moment, w którym siedziałeś sobie, nie wiem, w domu któregoś dnia i myślałeś, że chciałbyś kiedyś pracować dla NASA, zanim w ogóle dostałeś tą propozycję?
I have to say not really, but I was very fascinated with the United States space program. As a child, I watched the lunar landing, Apollo 11 on July 20th, 1969, when Neil Armstrong stepped on I witnessed that. I was only 4 or 5 years old. 4 years old. And I was always amazed by space, but I never imagined that I would, ultimately be working for the premier space agency on the planet. And I'm so glad that I had that opportunity.
A pamiętasz pamiętasz dzień, w którym byłeś na rekrutacji? Czy była jakaś rekrutacja związana z tym, że tam dołączyłeś, czy to była raczej formalność?
It was basically a formality, right?
Okay.
By that time, I had already been in the government for several years, and NASA is a government agency, although they're an independent agency, and they're not very political or anything like that. They're focused on science and knowledge. But the process was basically a formality.
Co cię zaskoczyło po wejściu do świata kosmosu?
So one of the things that impressed me right from the beginning as a lawyer was the culture. It's a very unique culture, and it's a unique culture within the United States government itself. As a lawyer, you are used to competition. Combat even, right? You are trying to win. And in that context, it helps to be somewhat of a competitor and not a collaborator. In the NASA world, it is all about sharing information, collaborating, cooperating. And that's not just, within the agency itself, but also among international space agencies. We cooperate in order to make space happen. And we do that for lots of reasons, not least of which is it's pretty damned expensive, right? There's no country on the planet, never has been, that could of itself fully fund all of the ambitions that humanity has with regard to space. So cooperation is really essential to space exploration. That was really different for me as a lawyer and as a person in the U.S. government, that the focus was less on competition than it was on collaboration. And I mentioned the kind of unique culture at NASA, and it really is. It's very much, a lot of people like to say, our company is like a family, or our agency is like a family. NASA really is very much like a family. And there's only probably, I would say there's maybe 1 or 2 other agencies in the U.S. government that are like that. Certainly in the intelligence community, they are like that. They sort of have to be because it's a very, insulated environment, very closed environment. But NASA is as well. And they really do care about not only the employees, but the employees' family. They are very big on education, learning, putting employees through programs to teach them more about not only just their jobs, but also about what the agency does, about science and space. And putting them through leadership programs. All of this is paid for by the agency to make you a better manager or a better executive or a better employee or a better secretary, so that you really feel as though you have a stake in the success of the mission. And I think that's very not something I would have expected.
No, to zgodzę się, tym bardziej, że ja na przykład też mam takie przekonanie, że dużo firm w momencie, kiedy, mówię o innych firmach, że kiedy przyjdziesz, to one oczekują, że ty już będziesz na jakimś poziomie wiedział i już będzie wiedział, jak wszystko dalej robić. A to jest Myślę, że to jest naprawdę, no musi być to mega rzecz, kiedy w ogóle czujesz, że to wszystko jakby oni o ciebie dbają, chcą cię edukować, jakby o to, żebyś był tym lepszym pracownikiem dla nich. No.
Right. And I remember there was an executive training program at Harvard that one of the people in my leadership chain said, you should do this so that, we can, give you more skills and you will feel better about, taking greater risks, being a more aggressive leader. There's this program at Harvard that you can do that, the agency will pay for you to go up there for a week or two. And I was thinking, I'll do it when I have time. And that's what everybody says. They say, okay, I have so much work to do that I don't have time to make myself a better leader. Mm-hmm. I don't have time to make myself a better executive. And the response is one that remains with me today. There's never going to be time. That's why you have to do it now.
Okay. Naprawdę dobrze powiedziane.
And, making sure that the employees are given those opportunities because maybe, it may lead to them ultimately leaving the agency to go work for, I don't know, Boeing or Airbus or SpaceX or somebody like that. Mm-hmm. And that's a risk that the government takes in making that investment. But in the meantime, it makes them a better NASA leader.
Mm-hmm. A masz takie przekonanie, że osoby, które są zatrudnione w NASA, robią to bardziej z powołania niż dla pieniędzy?
Oh, yeah. I think you mean they do it for the mission and for the satisfaction and the ability to participate in something that, let's face it, is pretty unusual and pretty unique and, pretty goddamn awesome, right? Mm-hmm. So, yeah, believe me, nobody does it for the money because remember, you're still working for the government, okay? So you're not making a lot of money to begin with. NASA pays you well, but they don't pay, as well as, some company's going to be able to do. Mm-hmm. But no, people do it because they are a part of something that is extraordinary.
W NASA byłeś na początku zatrudniony jako specjalista do spraw legislacyjnych.
As a senior international lawyer.
Prawnik od spraw legislacyjnych.
I spraw międzynarodowych.
Okej. I na przykład pamiętasz swoje pierwsze zadania, które miałeś do zrealizowania?
The first thing that I worked on at NASA? Oh my. Probably would have been an agreement between, at the time, Clinton was president, and the vice premier of the Soviet Union at the time was Viktor Chernomyrdin, I think, right?
I don't know.
Of Russia. It was Russia by then because that was 1994, 95. So by then it was the Russian Federation. Chernomyrdin was the vice premier, let's say, of Russia. Al Gore was the vice president of the United States. And I think the first big thing that I worked on for NASA as a lawyer, was the Gore-Chernomyrdin agreement, which had to deal with cooperation on a whole bunch of activities, including the space shuttle missions to the Mir space station. We had a number of missions where astronauts launched on the space shuttle up to the Mir space station, and there was some cooperation.
Czy pierwsze 3 miesiące pracy były dla ciebie trudne? Z czym najwięcej pamiętasz, miałeś problemy może?
I would say that it was difficult. So it was, yes, every day was difficult, but not just the first day. Every day. If you were doing your job well, 2 things would always be true. It was going to be hard, and you would never be bored. It would never be boring. You weren't going to say, "Oh boy, I wish I had something interesting to do." No, you always have something. But yeah, no, sure it was hard. Thank God. You're doing important stuff. So, and NASA's an agency that's kind of, 24/7. I mean, the International Space Station that's, sitting up above the Earth right now, 400 kilometers going around the Earth. Okay, so that thing has been continuously inhabited by human beings for 25 years.
Okay.
Right? So, the space agencies that are supporting them, they don't take breaks. There's not a time when, okay, NASA's closed, or Roscosmos is closed. No, I mean, there are people supporting people who are surviving in space all the time.
Nie była zwykła praca od 9:15.
Generally not. I mean, yes, for a lawyer starting out, at the agency, yes, it's much more reasonable. But, as I progressed in the last years of my time, specifically as a senior executive at NASA, some of the issues that I was responsible for included the reentry of spacecraft that were, decaying from orbit and coming down to Earth. Now, stuff comes down to Earth every single day, okay? There's a lot of stuff in space. There's over 50,000 trackable objects right now whipping around this planet at 17,500 miles per hour, 28,000 kilometers per hour, okay? So there's a lot of stuff that ultimately degrades in orbit and comes down and lands. And from time to time, some of it's pretty big, right? We just had an incident near Poznan where a piece of Elon Musk's Falcon, right, came down and landed. Now, most of the time, it goes into the water because 75% of the Earth's surface is water. And never has anybody been injured by it.
Ciekawe, co?
Because it's, I mean, because, again, the probabilities are so small. I
Czy
think
one są nawigowane tak, żeby spadały w takie miejsca?
No, a lot of this stuff is it's uncontrolled. Most of it's uncontrolled. Now, when the space station, for example, ultimately deorbits, it will be a controlled reentry. And the idea is that for really big stuff that's not going to disintegrate when it comes through the atmosphere, if it's made of something like titanium or something that's going to withstand that, if in that case, you really do want to have a controlled reentry. But most of the stuff that comes down every day is an uncontrolled reentry. I think when we brought Skylab down, we might have killed a sheep, but there's no person that's ever been killed by orbital debris. You can say, yes, thank God, because there's an awful lot of it, and it's only getting worse. I mean, we have lots of trash up there. And when you talk about, the future risks for space, that's one of the things we will talk about.
W trakcie w ogóle kariery w NASA poprzez te twoje progi, ponieważ ta kariera trwała 25 lat, tak? 25 lat. Już w ostatnich latach awansowałeś na dyrektora do spraw współpracy międzynarodowej. I to był dyrektora do spraw eksportu, dobrze tam wyczytałem?
Yeah, so just to be clear, I was the director for interagency relations for export control as part of that. And I represented the agency in the space policy work that we did with the rest of the U.S. government. But yeah, so there were a lot of different pieces of that, being the director of interagency relations and the work that we did there. We had export control as one of them. The UN was under, the work that NASA did with the UN at the Committee on Peaceful Uses of Outer Space in Vienna. That, was under my responsibility. All the work that we did on national space policies and a great many other things were part of that. As well as supporting the international programs that we have, because NASA had, when I was there, cooperation with countries all over the world, not just the main spacefaring ones that you would think of, like, Russia or the European Space Agency, but I mean,
Polska,
lots of people. Yeah. NASA and Polska have agreements. I wrote one of them when I was working for the Polish Space Agency. And Polska is doing a great job considering it's only 11 years old, right?
Polacy chyba tworzą jakieś mikrosatelity, takie technologie związane.
Even before Polska, Poland had supplied satellites, small sats. In fact, the first couple satellites that were built by Poland, their development was led by someone who made great contributions to Poland's advancement in space in the modern era. His name was Piotr Wołański, and he was a member of the Polish Academy of Sciences. He worked for ELOT for a long time. He worked for for Polytechnic. Brilliant guy. Was one of the first people in the world to theorize about the formation of the moon as part of the Earth. And just a wonderful guy. Unfortunately, he passed away just a few years ago. But he led the development of some of the first Polish satellites. And we have many more that are coming along.
Cofnijmy się proszę jeszcze do tej kariery twojej, bo oczywiście będziemy zaraz rozmawiać też o i Polskiej Agencji Kosmicznej, o tym, co Polska robi, jak w ogóle wygląda na tle tego sektora też i wśród innych państw, które od siebie tam również realizują misje. Natomiast interesuje mnie na przykład w czasie twojej kariery bycia dyrektorem do spraw już tam, o których wymieniłeś wcześniej. Powiedz mi, jakie na przykład były dwa największe wyzwania, które realizowałeś i dwa największe sukcesy.
Okay.
Zacznijmy od wyzwań.
So, two of the greatest challenges, are you saying? Is that the first one? Okay. Excuse me. Well, I would say that one of the greatest challenges, maybe the greatest, was a very difficult day. February 1st of 2003. Now, that day doesn't mean anything to you, but it means everything to people at NASA. On February 1st, 2003, the space shuttle mission STS-107 on the Columbia orbiter returned from the International Space Station, and on its return to Earth, disintegrated and killed 7 astronauts. And that was a very hard day. So one of my greatest challenges was being part of I think that was a Sunday. It was either a Saturday or a Sunday. So it wasn't a day when most people were at work. And it was cold. It's in February. And it didn't matter that it was a Sunday. Everybody from NASA showed up at work. Nobody had to call you. We knew we were needed. Their families needed us. We had several crew members that were lost that day, who were who had family that was international. Kapilana Chawla was a NASA astronaut, but her family was Indian. Of course, Ilan Ramon was an Israeli astronaut. All of his family, was coming from Israel. So we had to do things like, make sure that we were providing support to the families. Also figuring out what the hell happened. Why did this $1 billion space vehicle all of a sudden go away within seconds as it re-entered? There was a lot of work to do. There was work to make information available to the commission that was established to investigate it. So that was the hardest day, one of the hardest projects, probably the hardest, in my opinion. One of the
To co się stało
Most
z tą
memorable-
stacją międzynarodową w końcu? Co się stało z tą stacją w końcu?
Well, it wasn't the International Space Station. It was the shuttle.
okay.
It was the
Okay,
shuttle
okay,
that
okay.
disintegrated. No, the space station was fine. These guys were coming in. I'm sure you remember the event generally, that the Space Shuttle Columbia is coming down February 1st, 2003. It's starting to re-enter, and all of a sudden it's coming over Texas, and it just, is ripped apart.
O kurczę.
And doesn't, and 7 astronauts, are dead in seconds.
A ciężko było to przewidzieć? W ogóle tą całą sytuację?
Yeah, because we didn't know what caused it for the longest time. What caused it was that pieces of the launch vehicle, as it was being launched from Cape Canaveral, from Kennedy Space Center, the fuel tanks are super cooled, so they're freezing, right? And pieces of them break off as the vehicle is launching, because it's launching, with huge force. So they break off, and one of them broke off and hit the leading edge of the wing of Columbia. So now Columbia is flying up, and it's got a hole in the wing. Now it doesn't matter at that point, because the wing isn't serving any purpose, as far as any major purpose, as far as, direction or stability, because there's thrust vector control on the engines that are pushing the launch vehicle up, that are pushing the shuttle up, and those are giving it direction and force. So it goes up to the space station. They do their work there for a week or so. They come back. But now when they are returning to Earth, the shielding on those wings is vital. It protects the whole vehicle. And those heat tiles, those tiles on there that are absorbing that heat, if they're not there, that launch vehicle, that space shuttle just goes away, and those people burn up. And so that's what happened. But we didn't know it at the time. It took a long, long time to figure that out. So anyway, talking about, biggest challenge, the thing that hurt the most, that had to be it. I know you asked for 2, but let's go to a success, because we're going to run out of time. One of the things I'm most proud of is the work that we did on the International Space Station. I was very, first of all, fabulous group of people who put that thing together. Just awesome. The best minds in the agency, and the best minds in all the other space agencies that put the International Space Station Agreement together. And I had the privilege of being the author of several of the provisions in there that we still use today to govern our lives on the International Space Station. I wrote the provisions regarding criminal jurisdiction. So if there's a crime committed on there, what happens? Space Station is a multilateral program, because one of the things I mentioned, just at the beginning of this discussion, was that when it comes to space, you really can't do it all by yourself. You need partnerships. And that's true for countries as well as for companies. And so in the International Space Station, we have the United States, we have Europe, which is represented by the European Space Agency. We have Canada, we have Japan, and we have Russia, right? And we've had that now. Fully occupied space station orbiting the Earth 400 kilometers above our heads for 25 years, right? And those agreements were signed in 1988, and we've made it happen. And one of the key provisions of the ISS, as we call it, agreements that I like to recall is that on criminal jurisdiction, which tells us, what's going to happen in the event a crime is committed on the station, who gets to decide what happens to the to the case and to the
A
individual.
jakie przestępstwa na przykład mogłyby być popełniane? Jakieś przykłady?
So principally, we operate on the basis of nationality, but also on territoriality, because some pieces of the space station belong, for example, to Russia, and some pieces belong to the United States or Japan or others. But principally, we operate on the basis of nationality. If it's your guy who's doing something, then you
A
know.
jak oceniasz w ogóle tą współpracę pomiędzy tymi krajami? W sensie to była fajna, miła współpraca, czy zdarzały się jakieś konflikty, które trzeba było wtedy rozwiązywać?
It's like any partnership, you know. Basically, everybody's there, you know, on a common goal. It's harmonious, but you know there are disagreements, and those, you know, they don't become heated disagreements. They don't become violent disagreements. Certainly not on the station. But yeah, the agencies have different priorities. Sometimes their funding dictates how much they can do and what they cannot do. But along with the criminal jurisdiction, one of the elements that I'm most proud of being associated with was I wrote the code of conduct that tells you how to behave on the International Space Station, and the authority of the station commander, and who, you know, basically how we ensure that life on the space station proceeds harmoniously, cooperatively, that sort of thing.
Jakie były punkty na przykład? Ze 2-3 punkty, które były w takim zapisie.
Okay,
na przykład.
first most important point. Commander's in charge of the ship, and he's responsible for everybody's safety. Okay? That's important. Just like on a ship on the ocean, okay? Commander has the authority. He gets his instruction from the flight directors down on Earth. But, you know, he's the one, or she, we often have a female commander, is basically in charge, and his or her main responsibility is the well-being of the crew. Okay. We don't use the space station for personal financial gain. Okay. That's another thing. You're up there representing your country. And, you know, according to the Outer Space Treaty of 1967, you're not just representing your country, you're representing all of humanity. Okay. Astronauts are the ambassadors of mankind, according to the Outer Space Treaty. So act like it, right? Behave as though you are an ambassador for humanity. So things like that.
A zdarzały się przypadki niepodporządkowania się na przykład?
There have been some discussions about, you know, some things that people have brought up to the station that might later be, I don't know, auctioned on eBay or something like that. But by and large, everybody knows, you know, how to behave. So that's good. These are all professionals, remember.
Przejdźmy na taki, myślę, że ciekawy temat, ponieważ Polskę jako kraj poznałeś już podczas studiów, tak? Gdzie, bo tam trochę poczytałem, że trochę jeździłeś, to było w ramach praktyk, tak? Rozumiem takich.
Well, how did I first come to Poland? So that was back during PRL era, right? So I was here during the communist era, the salad days of communism in Poland. And I fell in love with the place, absolutely. And I am still in love with it. That probably has a lot to do with the reason that I'm sitting here in front of you, and not somewhere in Washington or somewhere else. So yeah, I absolutely fell in love with Poland, but not because of the government, which was shit, but because of everybody, you know, but the government.
Polubiłeś polską społeczność, ludzi?
Absolutely.
Uważasz, że są inni od amerykańskich? Znaczy pod kątem na przykład takiego mindsetu?
Poles have something that I think is rather unique in the human drama. And I used to call it romantic, and I still think it is kind of romantic in its own way. But Poles have something that not everybody possesses, and that's perseverance. And the ability to resist for long periods, sustained periods of time. You know, you look at, I don't know, how many uprisings there were, during the 123 years that we didn't have a country, right? You got Kosciuszko, you've got November, you've got January uprisings, you've got all sorts of things going on, in addition to that, even, just like small protests in Chechnya and things in Silesia and stuff. And the Polish spirit is one that just doesn't give up, I mean, it's, I think it's, it's a very, to my mind, it is a romantic notion that there are things that are worth fighting for. There are things that are worth dying for. And that even when you are defeated, you don't know that you're defeated. You don't act as if you're defeated. You continue to persevere. You maintain and preserve the national identity and the sense of what being Polish means, the sense of a love of freedom, of justice, that sort of thing. And I think that's just, not everybody has that.
Powiedz mi, w momencie, kiedy już przyleciałeś, już byłeś parę razy na przykład w Polsce, bo myślę, że też warto wspomnieć, ponieważ twoją żoną jest Polka.
Tak jest.
Pani Małgosia, moja ciocia też jednocześnie. W którym momencie tych przyjazdów do Polski mieliście okazję się poznać i jak to się stało?
Well, we didn't meet in Poland.
Okay, to nie było w Polsce.
No, we met in Ann Arbor, Michigan, of all places.
Okay.
Isn't that where most people most Polish and American people meet is in Michigan? No, it's again, not your average story, just like, how I got to be at NASA. She was doing a program at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. I was visiting a friend of mine, and she lived in the same house as he did, and we met there. So to
była miłość od pierwszego wejrzenia?
Yes. So it was, but definitely not your average American guy travels to Poland, meets a nice Polish. Not at all. It was completely unique.
No, ale też chyba trudne, bo też chyba warto wspomnieć, że bardzo też długo żyliście Stany, Polska.
Well, especially then when you have a child.
No, i
and
jest podróż do Krakowa.
All of a sudden you have a commuter family and your son, in our case, is basically, growing up in split worlds, where, he sees his father far less than he should. And then he comes to the United States and, it takes his mother a little while to get over there. Thankfully, as poor a job as I did of raising my son in that kind of situation, he has completely done the opposite. He is a model father. And he doesn't get it from me. He gets it from the fact that he had a wonderful grandfather here in Poland, and wonderful mother, and wonderful grandmother and family that taught him what it means, to be a genuine parent. But the very unusual situation. And when you have a commuter family, it is hard. And I think we basically sort of gave up on that. And my wife, Małgosia, moved to the United States. I guess it was about 2004, so maybe 2005. And she was there for a while, and then she came back to take care of her parents. And I ultimately chose, when I had the opportunity to retire from NASA, and President Trump was first elected, that I figured it was a good time to retire, and moved here to be with them.
W którym roku idzie się na emeryturę w NASA?
2017.
poszedłeś, tak?
That's when
Wtedy, w 2017.
Yeah, 2017 is when I retired, moved here. And then at the end of 2017, I started working for the Polish Space Agency, Polsa.
Tak, no. Warto o tym właśnie, fajnie, że płynnie przechodzimy. Powiedz mi, jakie były pierwsze wrażenia pomiędzy tym, co zauważyłeś, pracą w NASA, a Polską Agencją Kosmiczną?
They're completely different. But the one thing that's not different, the one thing they have in common, and I think this is true for all space agencies, is that the people are absolutely dedicated and devoted to good public service, to increasing knowledge, to enhancing understanding. I think that is just something that is in the blood of people who get into space agencies. And I think space agencies have a rare talent for identifying those kinds of people who share that vision. And if you want to work for a space agency, be that kind of person. Be someone who's curious, someone who asks questions, someone who's willing to take risks and make mistakes. Be someone who wants to know more tomorrow than you know today. And I think, Polsa and NASA share that quality. What Polsa and NASA don't share is a huge budget, right? NASA's budget is what, $26 billion? Polsa, doesn't even dream of 26 billion, right? Complete, orders of magnitude difference in what the agencies themselves can pay for. But that's okay. Polsa's 11 years old. Okay.
A NASA powstało?
NASA's over 60, right?
No.
So NASA was, founded in 1958.
I przepraszam, że ci przerwę, przypomnijmy jeszcze w NASA pracuje 17 tysięcy osób?
Right, 17,500.
17 tysięcy osób, a w agencji?
And Polsa, less than 100. So,
no, okay.
But hey, you know what? We got an astronaut. We got a Polish astronaut. He's going to be going up in less than a month. Sławomir Wiśniewski, right? And he's going to be up on the International Space Station for a couple of weeks. He's going to be doing experiments that have been provided by Polish institutions. He's going to be looking at, effects of radiation and microgravity on all sorts of things. He's going to be doing experiments with artificial intelligence. Finding ways to reduce the demands that we make on satellites right now, and the reduced support that they need from the ground. I think we're in a special time here in Poland, and this is something we really should be celebrating.
Jakie widzisz atuty, takie największe zalety Polskiej Agencji Kosmicznej? Ponieważ Polska Agencja Kosmiczna głównie pomaga NASA w kontekście takim, że buduje różnego rodzaju narzędzia do pomiarów elektrocieplnych.
Okay, so Poland's strengths right now that are attractive to NASA and other agencies, not just NASA, but the German Space Agency is an entity that has contracts with Polish companies as well, and so do other space agencies. Poland's strengths currently tend to lie in robotics and sensors and things like that. But Poland is doing great research in propellants, fuels that are very important to, how are we going to get to places like Mars? Because right now we're getting there by virtue of chemical propellants that, take us 6 to 9 months minimum to get there. Okay. You put a human being on a launch vehicle that's going to go to Mars right now, and it's a one-way trip, guaranteed. We have no way of bringing them back. Not even sure they're going to survive the journey to get there. And I'm not talking about landing. I'm just talking about, going around the place, orbiting in the place. So we need to do better with propulsion than we're doing. And Poland's doing a lot of research in that. And, if you were to ask me, and I don't think this is just my opinion, I think that Poland quite well could have been the third country in the world to have put an object into space if we hadn't had the Soviet Union as our overlord. But the Soviets decided that the talent and the promise that Polish engineers had already demonstrated with regard to rocket propulsion was not something that they were interested in seeing further develop. And so as a result, Poland was basically discouraged from capitalizing on the expertise that we have here in propulsion and in rocketry. But, you know, that doesn't exist anymore, at least that particular imposition of oversight that the Soviets provided. It remains, however, that, you know, if you understand orbital mechanics and physics, unfortunately, I would say we live in a bad neighborhood because the things that we would put up in space, if they go beyond suborbital, if they actually go beyond the Kármán line, beyond 100 kilometers, then the remains of them is going to land in a place that isn't altogether friendly to us. Okay, that's just, you know, the facts of physics and the Earth's rotation and orbital mechanics. So there may be some continued barriers to full exploitation of Poland's launch vehicle and propulsion potential, but we have it. We can get there. I think we can make a real contribution to some of the future propulsion techniques that are going to be needed. Right now, we're doing great with robotics and sensors, and I think we'll continue to do that. And I would like to see us do more there.
A jakie na przykład twoim zdaniem są największe szanse i zagrożenia w nadchodzącej dekadzie poprzez komercjalizację eksploracji kosmosu przez takie firmy jak na przykład SpaceX albo Origin?
Okay, so I think there's great opportunities. I think they're going to be increasingly significant players in space. I think that, and I think that governments generally are trying to take what we call a light touch to, you know, not over-regulate them. But there's also a potential issue with a light touch. If space is nothing else, it's two things. It's expensive and it's risky, okay? It costs a lot of money and sometimes it costs lives. At NASA, we've killed 17 astronauts, okay? If you look beyond astronauts, in the Soviet Union, hundreds have been killed in space program development. Explosions at Baikonur, explosions at Plesetsk. If you go to Alcantara in Brazil, where they were trying to develop their launch vehicle, they also...
A w SpaceX na przykład? SpaceX też parę osób zginęło.
Yeah, so, you know, we're talking about, you know, lots of risk, okay? Well, one of the ways that you minimize risk like that is through oversight and regulation, making sure that there are certain standards that you always adhere to, and you don't make the same mistake twice, so that you're not killing the same people over and over again. And I worry that although I think it's great that, you know, the commercial sector is taking an increasingly large role in space, I just want somebody to make sure that they remember that it can't always be the profit that drives it. You also have to know that the people involved are going to survive. And that is not always an easy thing to do. And sometimes those things are going to conflict. And in my opinion, given the sacrifices that have already been made for space exploration, when it comes to profit and it comes to people surviving, I take the people every time.
Jeżeli mówimy o eksploracji kosmosu w ogóle, to może powiedzmy, bo teraz głośnym tematem, przynajmniej do jakiegoś czasu, no jest na pewno misja Artemis, czyli ludzi ponownego wysłania w Księżyc od ostatniego momentu, chyba w którym miał miejsce w 1972 roku przez misję Apollo. I czemu znów patrzymy w Księżyc i po tylu latach? Co się działo w ogóle przez te wszystkie lata i czemu dopiero w tym momencie, ponieważ misja Artemis jest dopiero od iluś tam lat wcześniej. Dlatego co się działo przez te wszystkie czasy, czemu nie chcieliśmy wcześniej próbować wysłać tam ludzi i dopiero teraz w tym momencie jakby może się to zdarzyć, już abstrahując od całej teraz sytuacji związanej z rządami Stanów Zjednoczonych i z tym, co jest jeszcze wątpliwe.
Okay, well, so if you want to know why, remember, the moon belongs to everybody, okay? So it's not just, if NASA wasn't going back to the moon, there's nothing that said nobody else could, right? So, I mean, China has, launched some missions, some very successful missions, especially, on the far side of the moon, right? They have sent missions there that nobody else had done. So it wasn't, everything shouldn't be in NASA's lap on when it, on space exploration, I think. At the same time, NASA had an intention of returning to the moon long before Artemis was ultimately adopted in the Trump administration. But in the first Trump administration, as a confirmed space policy from what the Obama administration had wanted to do, and continuing that idea of going to the moon and then ultimately Mars, which was an idea itself that was begun in the second Bush administration. So I mean, the idea of this has been kicked around for a while. It's just that the funding and priority, the Congress getting behind it, and all that, finally didn't happen until just about 10 years ago. Okay, so we're set to go back. We've already had one successful launch. We've had Artemis 1, which was uncrewed, went around the moon, came back. We're testing out technologies, right? Artemis 2, supposed to go, the end of this year or maybe the beginning of next. Okay, that's going with people. They're not going to land. They're just going around, again, checking out everything to make sure, because safety, right?
A jest w tym prawdy, że jeżeli później ten statek wlatuje w orbitę Księżyca, to nie ma łączności pomiędzy NASA a pilotami? Że oni są oddani w swoje już...
The astronauts in the space capsule are on their own and not controlled by ground control. Well, they're...
Is it true or not?
They have the ability to pilot the spacecraft, but they're also, planned maneuvers for the spacecraft that, are fed into the system, but they can be changed instantaneously if they have to. You try to, have all of these things planned out. And of course, the flight director is calling out commands to the pilot of the spacecraft, when they need to make adjustments. But yeah, it's a cooperative effort between the ground and the folks on the spacecraft.
Myślałem, że wiesz, to jest już tak daleko do tego Księżyca, że po prostu ta komunikacja już nie łapie.
Oh no, we're in communication with them all the time, except for when they're on the far side. And that's very short. Yeah. And well, actually, there's not going to be much of a problem with that because we have lunar orbiters now that provide constant communication. So there should be no blackout periods.
A przypomnij proszę, ile leci się na Księżyc?
How many would actually land on the moon? So we're taking 4 on Artemis 3. Okay, there'll be 4 people in the Dragon capsule, in the not the Dragon, in the Orion capsule that are going to go to the moon, and that would be end next year, beginning the year after. Probably 2027.
Jakby dzisiaj wylecieli?
Sorry?
Jakby dzisiaj wylecieli?
No, it only takes a few days. It used to take 4 days to get to the moon. Now it only takes 3.
Okay.
Because so Apollo 11, which landed on the moon in 1969. Okay, that landed on July 20th of 1969. The launch was July 16th. So it took 4 days to get to the moon. Today, it only takes 3. So we're planning on having 4 people in the Orion capsule that would go to the moon. So at least 3 of them probably would be going down on the moon. And one of the objectives, the current objectives of the Artemis program, is to place the first woman and the first person of color on the surface of the moon, returning to the moon, as you said, after, a hiatus of almost 50 years. So that would be, a major achievement. But you ask, why are we going back? Right? Aren't there other things we can do, for...
Jest Mars na przykład,
what it's ultimately going to cost. It might ultimately cost, $50 billion, this whole program, over the life of the program. Now, if you compare the cost of this to Apollo, this is a lot cheaper, and we're getting a lot more experience, knowledge, technological development for the money than we got out of Apollo. What you have in your laptop right here, those kind of electronics and computing power didn't exist.
Okay.
For Apollo.
Wow.
What you have in your cell phone had more computing power than was in the space shuttle. So we're getting a lot more for a lot less money. But the idea is I have a few reasons to go back to. Well, first of all, we need to learn more about it, right? As I mentioned, Piotr Wołański, not too long ago, was leading proponent of the theory about the moon's formation as, from a collision with the Earth, which has a lot of evidence to support it. So we can learn more about the formation of our own planet by investigating the moon and understanding the moon better. There is material on the moon that could be used for applications here on Earth, not least of which is helium-3, which is useful both as a power source similar to nuclear power, but doesn't have the hazardous waste issue, but also is useful for things like medical imagery and things like that. And so the moon has, potential resources that could be useful. We need to be able to learn how to live on another planet. If we're going to go to Mars, we need to get some experience living life on another celestial body.
Myślisz, że to jest możliwe? Żeby zamieszkać na Marsie przez jakiś dłuższy określony czas?
Do you think we're doing a good job taking care of this planet?
Myślę, że to zajmie bardzo dużo czasu. No.
Yeah, but do you think we're doing a good job of taking care of this planet?
No.
Are we? Are we doing a good job of making sure that
w bardzo pozytywnym sensie
that we will have an Earth, for your grandchildren? So we need to, maybe think about the possibility, maybe not specifically of human beings as a species resettling on Mars, but if we can prove that we can live on another planet, we might be able to save our species because we are destroying this one, in case you hadn't noticed. We are absolutely demolishing the Earth on which we live. And we are consuming resources at an alarming rate. And pretty soon, the planet is going to make us pay for it. So we either learn how to take better care of this planet that we have, or we start finding out how to live somewhere else. You don't have many other choices. So going to the moon gives us an opportunity to learn how to be somewhere else without absolutely having to be so far away. The moon is 400,000 kilometers from Earth. Mars is an average of about 280 or so million kilometers from Earth, okay? To give you a sense, at its shortest distance between the Earth and Mars is about 65 or 70 million kilometers, okay? The biggest distance between the Earth and Mars is almost 500 million kilometers, okay? The average is around 280 million kilometers. The sun is half that distance, okay? So that gives you a sense. We are 150 million kilometers from the sun. We're talking about a planet that is on average twice that away from the Earth. And so if we want to learn how to successfully live on a place like Mars, which is ultimately the goal that has been stated by NASA and U.S. administrations for decades, then we had better learn to do everything that we can learn on a place like the moon that isn't 400 million kilometers away, but only 400,000. And that isn't 9 months away, but is only 3 days away in case we get into some kind of trouble.
A co twoim zdaniem stanowi największe wyzwanie w tych misjach? Właśnie kwestie tego, czego nie znamy, kwestie głowy, psychologiczne na przykład, czy technologia na przykład, która nam jeszcze nie pozwala osiągnąć tego w tym momencie?
You know what? It's a great question. The answer to which is I don't know. Because all of those things are a challenge, right? Certainly the technology. We don't have the technology right now to safely transport humans to Mars and have them live there and safely return them. We just don't, okay? So we had better develop that. And that means developing better propulsion systems, more robust communication systems, and all sorts of things that we don't have. And being able to basically create a biosphere, an environment in which we could actually live and grow things and, survive. So, yeah. So technology, huge issue. You mentioned biology, not just the planet's biology, which is limited at best. Particularly if you consider the environment of Mars, which is carbon dioxide and nitrogen, I guess, and argon and a few other things, but it ain't exactly. It's not Miami Beach, and so you're not going to find a lot there to grow things on. So that the biological limitations are there, but also the human biology. How will humans, how will our physical corpus, our bodies, adjust or not to the radiation, to the cold? Remember, the average temperature on Mars is what, minus 60 degrees Celsius? Okay.
Każdego dnia, tak?
The average. No, because Mars temperature varies, wildly, depending on.
No właśnie, ta temperatura na Marsie, ona się zmienia, czy ona jest mniej więcej stała?
No. So highest temperature on Mars is 20 degrees centigrade. Lowest temperature on Mars is minus 150 degrees centigrade, okay?
Oh.
And so the average is like minus 60 degrees centigrade. So if you consider that that's an environment in which human beings generally don't thrive, okay? So we got to, how is our biology going to respond to that and adjust to it? And what are we going to do to, make sure that we could, in fact, survive in a place like that? And then you talked about, one of the most important, just along with the technological barriers, what about the psychological? We are talking about, deprivation of, virtually all daily contact that they are accustomed to in society, okay? So it would be a small group of people for a very long time, having to live and work together and resolve conflicts and deal with stress, right? Emergencies, medical emergencies, psychological emergencies, things just like we do on the space station, right? On every expedition to the space station, every crew on the space station has someone who is trained, as well as I was trained in emergency medicine. I was a paramedic for 27 years, and I worked with many astronauts while I was at NASA, and they were very familiar with all of the tools and techniques that we as paramedics use in emergency medicine here on the streets. So, you got to have people that are trained to do that, people who are able to provide psychological support, because it's a very, very challenging environment. And so, life on space station helps with that. But as far as things like technology and the biology, people on a space station aren't being subjected to average temperatures of minus 60 degrees centigrade. Okay. That's something that we got to, prepare for. Yeah.
Słuchaj, John, kto twoim zdaniem postawi pierwszą nogę na Marsie? Agencja rządowa czy prywatna firma?
While I would like for it to be under a government, maybe international government, international missions of governments that are supporting it, I would not be surprised if it's a commercial venture.
Ale to przez to, że mają więcej kasy? Czy większe możliwości? Czy...
Commercial activities, as I said, have a much more higher tolerance for risk than governments do. People ask us all the time in NASA, how come you guys didn't come up with this practice of returning the pieces of the stages of the launch vehicle, the way SpaceX is doing and Blue Origin is doing, so that they reuse the first stage, to bring it back and it lands on a pad, sometimes out in the ocean on a barge, sometimes at the Cape, and they say, why didn't NASA do that? Well, it is something that NASA had investigated and something that we actually looked at doing. But the success rate for the first, trials of that would have been, less than 30%. They would have been like 20%. So 8 times out of 10, we would destroy the vehicle. So we said, we're not, the Congress and the White House are not going to support an investment in something that fails 80% of the time. Elon Musk and his venture capitalist backers, they got cash, and they're willing to take that risk. And so, while so many of Elon's first attempts to do a controlled return of expended first stage of his launch vehicle, while so many of those burned up, fell off the barge when it never even came close to landing, and they were all lost, he kept trying and kept, correcting the errors. And finally, he's bringing back stuff every single time. He's not wasting the first stages of his rockets. And that's because they had a much higher tolerance for risk. When you're talking about putting people on another planet, I think they will also have that view. And as a result, they probably would be the first. It would probably be, it would be a commercial venture that does it first. I would just be hopeful that they care as much about safety as they need to, because there's not a lot of room for errors. And even when you have multiple redundant systems, you can still wind up killing 7 of your friends on February 1st, 2003 in a $1 billion vehicle.
Powiedz mi jeszcze, a czy NASA z prywatnymi firmami, takimi jak na przykład SpaceX Ilona Muska, dzieli się technologią?
Do we share technology? Sure. We have an obligation to. NASA, in the Space Act that founded NASA in 1958, the Congress said that one of NASA's obligations was to make available its knowledge, to publish the innovations that we learn. We try to do it responsibly, so that we're not teaching terrorists how to build ballistic missiles. But we do have an obligation to share our technology, and to also share it with the United States military and intelligence communities, to ensure that that they have the advantage of the latest technology, and they have an obligation to share with us as well, or I should say us. With NASA. I'm no longer us.
Jakie decyzje w twoim życiu prywatnym i zawodowym były najważniejsze z punktu widzenia kariery, którą przeżyłeś?
Well, I have to say, as I said at the beginning, probably the best decision that I ever made was to take NASA up on their offer. It is a community of wonderful people, very smartest people on the planet, hands down. Very smart people. We have a Nobel laureate who works at Goddard Space Flight Center in Maryland. He's been a NASA employee. He's a wonderful guy. We have astronauts who are experienced and curious about space exploration, that have done a wonderful job of representing not just the United States but humanity in space. Very, very smart people, very, very dedicated people who care most about understanding things, expanding understanding, sharing their understanding, making the world a smarter place, making us more scientifically literate, and giving us the capabilities to deal with the kinds of things that are truly existential threats to life on Earth. We need to do something about the way that we treat this planet, or we will not have a planet any longer. And the knowledge that we get from space that can help us to manage how we treat our planet is vital. So I would say that probably the most important decision I made career-wise was to accept that invitation. And it was, like I said, is hardest job I ever did, but the best job I ever did. And it was never boring, not once, ever.
A jaką radę byś przekazał młodym osobom, które gdzieś w tym kierunku chciałyby się udać?
Be curious. Be interested in something. Be willing to take risks. Be willing to stick your neck out, to raise your hand in class, and ask a question that you don't know the answer to. Be willing to learn. Be maybe even eager to learn. We need people with open eyes and hungry minds that are interested in more knowledge.
Słuchaj, jeszcze na samym końcu, najlepszą radę, jaką dostałeś, jaką możesz przekazać? No.
Don't worry. Be calm. Know that if you're doing what you're supposed to do, that's the best that you can do. That's really not so much advice that I got from NASA. It's advice that I got as a paramedic in the emergency medical services and in the fire and rescue services. If you want to be able to work with a gun to your head, you have got to have an understanding that if you're doing everything that you've been trained to do, then that is the best that you can do. And the worst thing that you can do in those situations is panic, because then not only are you not helping yourself, you're not helping the person that you came to help. So you need to, if you want to work in a high stress environment like NASA or in the fire and rescue service, you have got to just have the confidence that I can do what I set out to do. I can do it. Have some confidence and don't worry too hard.
I tym chyba akcentem zakończymy tą dzisiejszą rozmowę.
Okej.
John, dziękuję Ci ślicznie za tą rozmowę.
No, ja dziękuję.
No, wszystkiego dobrego.
Dzięki i miłego weekendu.
Wzajemnie. Dziękuję za rozmowę. A Wam, drodzy słuchacze i widzowie, jeżeli spodobał się ten odcinek, koniecznie zostawcie komentarz i łapkę w górę. Do usłyszenia w kolejnym odcinku podcastu Światła i Cienie.